Hi, I've recently found myself with some free time on my hands, and what better way to spend it than with some good old video games. Fallout 4 is what I've been sinking my teeth into recently, exploring the vast wastelands of Boston, and let me tell you, I'm loving it. Except for one aspect. The game's world border. So to give a little context, as I was exploring the nooks and crannies that Boston has to offer, I inadvertently arrived at the edge of the map. But just how did I know this? Did my radiation poisoning start going crazy? Did the map's terrain get too challenging to cross any further? Did something remotely interesting or unique happen in the slightest? No. I hit an invisible wall with a text box appearing stating that I simply cannot go any farther. Fair enough. Now, I may not be a game developer, but in a game about nuclear fallout, could this issue not have been slightly avoided by just increasing the amount of radiation that is beyond the fence? But anyway, as usual, I'm getting sidetracked. All of this got me thinking, just how do other games handle this same dilemma? How do game developers tear down this invisible wall and offer a truly immersive solution? So sit back, relax, hey, grab a cup of tea whilst you're on your feet, which is apparently a lot of you, so fair enough, my bad, and come a deep dive with me as I use the exact same title card as my last video to discuss the goods and not so goods of world borders in video games. Enjoy.
Warning, entering ecological dead zone.
Subnautica, an open-world survival game based around the exploration of an alien planet made up of 98% water. And let me tell you, it is absolutely terrifying. Though not technically a horror game in genre, this game has the ability to scare me far more than most actual horror games can. Which I guess in reflection might not be saying too much, considering I think by definition I'm an adult baby. Like my heart cannot handle too many scares. But it's not all scary. Take the safe shallows, for instance. I mean, I feel perfectly content swimming around with all this strange fish, so long as I'm within 10 meters of the sea's surface. But this? Yeah, I have to draw a line somewhere, I think. Though, as much as I could spend hours on end discussing just how much I love this game, today I'm here to talk about what I personally consider to be one of the scariest aspects of the game. Its world border. Now, where most games may just slap an invisible wall down, give you a little nuh-uh, and just call it a day, Subnautica approaches this issue in a manner which breaks no immersion and, if anything, heightens the overall experience. Venturing beyond the confines of the crater that this game is set on, you'll find yourself at the crater's edge. Described as an ecological dead zone, this edge is home to no aquatic life, with the exception of one species, adult ghost leviathan, and a lot of them. Personally, I love this. What a way to take a simple concept and just blow it out of the water. The crater's edge, in my opinion, is a fantastic way of limiting the player without actually limiting them. Because if you want to explore this pitch black void, you technically can. Not that there's anything necessarily crazy to find, but still, you can. And to me, that makes a difference. The game even rewards a player by adding a completely new entry into your character's PDA. And whilst I'm on the topic of the PDA, if you equip your trusty in-game scanner, it is possible to go out into this void and scan the adult ghost leviathan that live there, giving you yet another entry into your PDA. A final aspect that I think is worth mentioning, the game features a base building system, allowing you to create the underwater base and paradise of your dreams, filling it with as many cat posters as your little heart desires. But more relevant, I bring this up to discuss the fact that the game does not restrict you from building over the edge of this crater. If, for whatever reason, you want a permanent residency there, then shoot for it, why not? I mean, hey, throw in an observatory as well and you've got yourself a lovely little aquarium to marvel at these terrifying creatures. And I like that. Overall, I really do just appreciate all of these elements so much. Where most games, understandably, put an active effort into keeping the player as far away from this border as possible, Subnautica flips that entire concept on its head and, if anything, actively encourages the player to venture out into the nothingness, if even only once. Subnautica. Now, I know this might be a bit of a strange one, and perhaps it's not as crazy as some other games might be, but I honestly do think that the way Human Fall Flat handles its world border is pretty interesting. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Human Fall Flat, it is a physics-based puzzle game where you control a chill little guy. I don't know why I worded it like that in the script, but anyway, and traverse from one area to the next using the game's more wacky physics on your journey. And let me tell you, this game is a lot of fun, especially when you pair up with friends for it. I just think that the overall dynamic of the game is super comedic, and if you've never played it before, why not give it a shot? But more on the actual subject. Like I mentioned, the game handles the world border pretty interestingly. Instead of having more finite bounds to your environment, the game presents you with a sheer drop into the white abyss below. But that might not sound necessarily too interesting, so why don't we just give it a watch and see just what plays out in this white abyss. And there we have it, an entirely seamless, non-immersion breaking transition. There really is just something that I appreciate about this so much, and I don't really know why. Maybe it's just the general nature of the game itself. As easy as it would have been for the developers to simply just program a dev block to teleport you right back to the start of the map and get you right back on track, there really is just something about watching your chill little guy slam face first into the ground that never fails to amuse me, which is a sentence that I never expected to say out loud in my life. If anything, it acts as a really great accentuation of the main focus point of the game: physics. So yeah, perhaps it's not the most groundbreaking way of dealing with this issue, but with these type of analysis, I will always try and take every aspect into consideration where I can. Does the map's border fit with the game's genre? Does it handle this in an immersion-friendly manner? Does it actively contribute to gameplay elements? I'd say yes to all of these, and maybe that's why Human Fall Flat stands out to me so much. As I mentioned during the intro, I've recently been spending a lot of time playing Fallout 4, getting addicted to the chems and booze to distract myself from the oh-so-harsh realities of invisible walls. Obviously, it's not a big deal as I'm making it out to be, I'm kinda just a fan of dramatics. However, I would be lying if I said that I wasn't at least a little disappointed, but ultimately, that got me thinking. If Fallout 4 leaves me feeling so underwhelmed, I wonder how they handled it in what is greatly considered to be the best Fallout game in the franchise. Of course, I'm talking about Fallout New Vegas. And I'll spoil it now, I am pleasantly surprised. Fallout New Vegas' map takes place within the Mojave, a vast wasteland for you to explore. Though in sheer scale, it isn't as large as the likes of Fallout 4's map, and even more so Fallout 76's, but you can still get pleasantly lost as you traverse your way through the dunes and plains that is the Mojave. But if you take a trip to the map's outskirts, you may notice a slight detail. These hills, those are massive. So massive to the point where there is no feasible way for you to traverse your way over them. And that same sentence is true for the entirety of the game's map. So, in short, the game's environments become literally too treacherous for you to actually be able to go beyond that. And that's quite cool. Like, what a fantastic way of keeping the player within the map's bounds whilst maintaining that sense of both immersion and, even more than that, logic. Furthermore, in similar fashion, if you were to follow any of the various highways to their map's edge, you are yet again faced with a satisfyingly logical approach to a world border, and that is simply blockades. Each point of entry into and subsequently out of the Mojave Wastelands is barricaded or closed off in a manner which just feels satisfying, such as the likes of border control or alternatively like impassable wreckages. Now, I guess to address an elephant in the room, I understand that comparing two games might not be the most valid form of critique. However, I do feel like this is significantly more justified considering it is coming from the same franchise. It genuinely just makes me question how we went from this, a very logical solution which ultimately just makes sense, to a text box. Overall, I don't want this to come across as a pure dig at Fallout 4's design. I completely understand and sympathise with the fact that game development is just not as simple as that. And with a game like Fallout 4, it's entirely understandable why more thought was put into, actual gameplay elements, in contrast to making sure that every edge of the map was satisfyingly cut off to appease some random dude on YouTube. But as usual, I'm rambling. All of this to say that I understand why Fallout 4 is designed the way that it is. I just wish it was more like Fallout New Vegas, because, quite simply, Fallout New Vegas handled it fantastically. Also, I have never played Fallout 76, so who knows? I mean, maybe they do a better job in that one. Moving on. stay hydrated. It's time for some info dumping. I don't know why I wrote this all in one sentence, but here we go. The Forest is an open-world survival horror game where you play as the sole survivor of a plane crash, which has ultimately left you stranded on a densely forested island inhabited by cannibalistic monsters. Oh, and also your son has mysteriously vanished, so that is the driving force. You're looking for your son, and that is relevant, so I hope you're writing this down. Now, in terms of immersive implementation, I will always appreciate an island setting like this. I think, albeit not entirely unique nowadays, it is always at least a valid way of defining the bounds of the map. Whether it be that your character can't swim, or simply that the water is too vast to even bother voyaging over. Regardless, it's hard to deny that it makes sense. However, the Forest kind of falls into a bit of a grey area to me, as I believe it does both a good and not so good job of tackling this issue. Let me explain. By putting on your favourite pair of swimming shorts and taking the plunge into the sea, the game doesn't hold you back. You can swim as far as your heart desires, until you hit the invisible wall. That's right. The Forest's map is unfortunately lined at every edge with an invisible wall blocking you from going any farther. But then why even bother bringing it up, you might ask? And that's because swimming is not your only option here. The game features a somewhat expansive crafting and building system, allowing you to live off the land and create just the coziest of log cabins if you so wish. But it isn't just buildings that you can create, because you can create log rafts. And by hopping on one of these log rafts and sailing to the edge, you'll find just where my appreciation for this game's border lies. By approaching the map's edge, your character will present a picture of your son, reminding you just what you came to this island to do. I hope you wrote that down. And, like a lot of things, I really like that. Now, I know that I've thrown the word immersive around like crazy in this video, but it really is just a fantastic example of that. And I think for me, it really emphasises that you don't need to completely redefine a game's outskirts to have a satisfying conclusion to the invisible wall problem. Sometimes all it takes is a narrative and a simple animation. So, when it comes to the Forest, I think I share the same sentiment as this Reddit user. The Forest is an open-world survival horror game, and it's done, for the most part, very well. And I'll leave it at that. When I was doing my research on this subject, I found so many world borders that were interesting or just unique in the first place. So I wanted to throw in a little section more towards the end where I can dive into a few more games that I thought had an interesting border, but ultimately didn't find enough information or details on to discuss at crazy lengths. So prepare for some more info dumping, because here are a few more world borders for your viewing pleasure. The world border of Grand Theft Auto V, a game which I feel needs no introduction, falls into the island category of world borders, giving you a seemingly endless ocean to venture out on so long as you go by boat. Because, you see, the game keeps the swimming player at bay by simply turning them into shark food. However, if you do sail the seas, you'll eventually reach a point where your vehicle's engine stalls, and you'll slowly drift into the deep, dark ocean below. You know, I'm pretty afraid of the ocean, so this has always terrified me, but hey, it does solve the invisible wall problem. Okay, elephant in the room again. I am very aware that Minecraft's world is infinite. However, in previous versions, it was technically possible to reach an edge of sorts, so long as you're willing to travel. What number is that? Oh, it's only a 12.5 million block walk, which is just a short 800 hours of pure walking. That is crazy. Named the Farlands, this huge wall of mess and disorganization represents the breaking of the game's code. A point where chunk generation becomes a bit messier. And that is as far as I can discuss, because the thread I was reading got far too technical for my tiny little brain to understand. So yeah, though it's not your typical world border of sorts, I did just want to throw it in here because I just find it so fascinating overall. Assassin's Creed, as a franchise I guess, handles the invisible wall problem through story and narrative. Ultimately, the character you play as is within a simulation simulating the memories of a historical figure. I hope that makes sense. So, by approaching the borders of the map, you arrive at the, I guess you'd call it the end of the simulation. A point where the in-game simulation no longer has the information, or more so, memories, of what's beyond. which I find an interesting way of defining the game's space in an immersive fashion, whilst I guess taking the burden off the actual game developers to do it. No shade. Nier Automata's map, for the most part, is well defined with the use of unscalable walls and cliff edges. However, the exception to this is the desert region. By venturing deeper and deeper into the dunes of the desert of Nier Automata, eventually you will be met with a raging sandstorm that is just too powerful to progress through, which, through a more literal force of nature, pushes you, the player, back into the confines of the map. I think this acts as a very immersion-friendly way of the developers getting you right back on track. Portal. This is a weird one. Portal breaks the mold for world borders, as where most games like to give you the illusion of an ever-expansive world that is just slightly out of reach. Why bother with that when you can just not be allowed outside in the first place? So, in short, Portal solves the invisible wall problem, ironically, through making them very visible. This video has been an exploration on a topic which I wasn't sure had much depth or not, exploring how a variety of games define their world border for their map. What I had expected to be me slamming my head into invisible walls for about 15 minutes straight actually turned out to be a bit more interesting than I had anticipated. From the terrifying void that is Subnautica's world edge, through to the more game-breaking inclusion of Minecraft's. It really has been an interesting journey for me. Now ultimately, my aim was to shed a bit of light on what some could consider to be an underappreciated aspect of games, whilst discussing, in my unprofessional opinion, what make these good and not so good. And, unsurprisingly, the answer I've come to can be summed up in one word: immersion. Now, as much as I have clearly conveyed that I find invisible walls to be very boring and uninteresting, that's not to say that I don't value them, because in a very odd way, walking to the edge of the map to be abruptly stopped on my tracks, it really does just make me appreciate the amount of effort, creativity, and overall consideration that goes into other games, and I hope that comes across. Also, a last minute addition, ATV Off-Road Fury. You know what? When I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Who needs immersion? We just need more of this. But, as always, I'm just Jack. Thanks for watching.